On February 26, 2024, in Hendersonville, Tennessee, 14-year-old Sebastian Wayne Drake Rogers vanished from his bedroom sometime between midnight and dawn. The house was locked. His shoes were still beside the bed. His money and phone remained untouched on the kitchen table, exactly where they'd been the night before. There was no forced entry, no footprints on the wet ground, and no camera recorded any movement. The only object missing with him was a small yellow flashlight. Despite thousands of hours of searches, drones, sonar, K9 units, helicopters, and volunteers, no evidence has ever been found. In a neighborhood filled with cameras and lights, a boy with autism walked out of his home and left nothing behind. The question isn't where he went, it's how that disappearance was even possible. It began as an ordinary Sunday in Hendersonville, Tennessee. February 25, 2024. 14-year-old Sebastian Wayne Drake Rogers spent the day with his mother, Katie Proudfoot. They went shopping at a local department store, played arcade games at a bowling alley, and had dinner at a restaurant nearby. Everything seemed perfectly normal. Surveillance footage from those locations later confirmed it. Around 8:30 p.m., they returned to their home on Stafford Court, a quiet street lined with identical houses and well-kept lawns. Between 9 and 10 p.m., they both got ready for bed. Before the lights went out, Katie heard a loud thud from her son's room. She called out, "Are you okay?" And Sebastian replied, "I'm fine." That short response would be the last time anyone ever heard his voice. From 10 p.m. to midnight, Katie spoke on the phone with her husband, Chris Proudfoot, who was away on a work trip in southwest Tennessee. Cell tower data later verified the 2-hour call. When she finally went to bed around midnight, she believed her son was asleep in the next room. 6 hours later, at 6 a.m., she opened his door to wake him for school. The bed was empty. The blanket was cold. Sebastian was gone. She searched the house, the bathroom, the kitchen, the garage, but found nothing. His shoes were still next to the bed. His backpack was untouched. His phone and cash were sitting on the kitchen table, exactly where he had left them the night before. The front and back doors were locked. No windows were open. There were no broken latches or forced entry marks. The family dog hadn't barked or acted alarmed during the night. The only item missing, aside from Sebastian himself, was a small yellow flashlight he kept on his nightstand. Katie got into her car and drove around the neighborhood, checking the route to Sebastian's school less than a mile away. There was no sign of him anywhere. She called her husband, and he immediately contacted 911. That call triggered one of the largest search operations in Sumner County history. Within hours, local deputies, the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation, and the FBI joined forces. 2,000 people volunteered to help. Using GPS tracking apps, they combed through a search area of roughly 44,000 acres, about 4.5 miles around the house. They brought in K9 units, but the dogs couldn't detect a scent. The ground outside was damp. If Sebastian had left barefoot, there should have been footprints. There were none. Aerial drones and helicopters equipped with infrared cameras scanned the fields, creeks, and tree lines. Divers checked retention ponds and drainage systems. Every possible route, every water source, every patch of brush was examined. Nothing was found. By the end of the first day, investigators realized they didn't even have a starting point. No scent, no direction, no witnesses, no camera footage. The disappearance had occurred inside a closed system, a locked home with no visible exit. It was the kind of scenario detectives usually encounter only in theory, not reality. When investigators reconstructed the night, they could identify only 6 verifiable hours, midnight to dawn. That narrow window, between 12 and 6 a.m., became the core of the investigation, the period in which Sebastian either walked out of his home or was taken from it without anyone noticing. But the evidence refused to fit either theory. If he left voluntarily, why barefoot, without shoes, coat, phone, or money, in a February temperature of 40 degrees F? If someone entered, how did they get in without breaking a lock, leaving prints, or waking the dog? Detectives examined every window and door. All locks were functional, no pry marks. No fingerprints beyond the family's. The home's interior cameras showed no movement after midnight. Neighbors' doorbell cameras recorded no suspicious activity, no passing vehicles stopping on the street. The silence in the data was complete. The scene was so clean that investigators began to refer to it internally as the no-trace paradox, a disappearance that left no measurable trace of departure or intrusion. Forensics photographed every room, tested for blood and fibers, and used luminol under ultraviolet light. All results came back negative. The environment was normal. The absence of evidence became the only evidence they had. That missing yellow flashlight became the smallest yet strangest detail. Katie said Sebastian used it whenever the power flickered or during thunderstorms. It wasn't valuable, but it was distinctive, bright yellow, battery-powered, and easy to spot. Its disappearance suggested intent, maybe planning, or at least awareness. But there was no sign of the flashlight anywhere around the property or nearby terrain. Searchers specifically looked for it in ditches and ponds, hoping it might reflect light underwater. They found nothing. For investigators, the first 24 hours drew a straight line of contradictions. A locked house, no forced entry, a silent night, and a missing child who seemed to vanish into thin air. By sunset on February 26th, helicopters still circled, volunteers still searched, and the Proudfoot home stood sealed behind police tape. The physical evidence pointed nowhere. From that night forward, the case of Sebastian Rogers would no longer be treated as a simple missing person report. It was now a forensic mystery, one where the lack of clues spoke louder than any discovery. The first night had ended without answers. The first day of searching had done the same. And what investigators were left with was not just a disappearance, but a question that would drive the months ahead. How does a boy vanish completely from a locked house and leave nothing behind? When the 911 call came in that Monday morning, February 26, 2024, the dispatcher at Sumner County Emergency Communications logged it at 6:49 a.m. The report was simple but urgent. A 14-year-old boy named Sebastian Rogers had disappeared from his home overnight. His mother, Katie Proudfoot, was on the line, distraught and confused. She told them she had already checked the neighborhood, driven the short route to his school less than a mile away, and found nothing. Within minutes, deputies were dispatched to the home on Stafford Court. By 7:15 a.m., the first patrol car arrived. The officer confirmed what Katie had described: no forced entry, doors still locked, and no immediate signs of a struggle. The boy's shoes, phone, and cash were still inside. Deputies checked the backyard, the garage, the crawl space, even under the beds, nothing. With no sign of injury or foul play, they escalated it quickly to a missing child alert. At 8:10 a.m., the Sumner County Sheriff's Office requested assistance from the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation. By 9 a.m., a statewide Amber Alert was issued. TBI agents began coordinating with local patrol units and volunteers who were already gathering near the neighborhood. They established a command post in a nearby church parking lot, complete with GPS mapping screens and live communications. Over the next 48 hours, that command center became the operational heart of what would turn into one of the largest search efforts in Tennessee that year. The FBI joined on day 2, bringing their child abduction rapid deployment team and behavioral analysts. More than a dozen agencies became involved: the Hendersonville Police Department, the Gallatin Police Department, Tennessee Highway Patrol, Emergency Management, Metro Nashville PD, Wilson County Sheriff's Office, and multiple K-9 and rescue units from neighboring states. The first perimeter covered a 4.5-mile radius, roughly 44,000 acres. The terrain included residential streets, wooded lots, creeks, retention ponds, and open fields. 2,000 people, law enforcement officers, firefighters, park rangers, and civilian volunteers, joined the grid search. Each was equipped with a GPS tracking app that recorded their walking routes in real time, ensuring no section of land was left unsearched. Despite the size of the operation, no physical trace of Sebastian appeared. By noon that first day, the K-9 teams had already made several passes around the property. The dogs were trained to pick up human scent even after 12 to 24 hours. But handlers reported an odd result: the dogs caught no viable scent trail leaving the house. Not even down the driveway. In most missing child cases, dogs can at least track the scent for a short distance before losing it. Here, there was nothing. For investigators, that was the first major contradiction. If Sebastian had walked out on his own, barefoot, as the scene suggested, the damp ground outside, softened by humidity and dew, should have preserved prints or at least a chemical trace of human scent. K9 units should have been able to follow that trail for several yards before it dissipated. Yet every attempt failed. They brought in additional dogs from other agencies to cross-check the results. Same outcome. The lack of scent was so unusual that handlers questioned whether something inside the home, cleaning chemicals, HVAC airflow, even detergent, could have disrupted it. But environmental testing ruled that out. The air inside the home was normal, and the outdoor conditions were ideal for tracking. Meanwhile, search teams spread outward from Stafford Court, marking off sectors on the digital map. Drones equipped with thermal imaging swept over wooded areas and fields. Helicopters with infrared sensors flew grid patterns, covering a 5-mile perimeter in overlapping passes. Divers searched retention ponds and nearby creeks, assisted by sonar equipment. They even drained smaller ponds completely. Each effort came back empty. By sunset on the first day, the operation had expanded to include mounted patrols, ATVs, and volunteers on foot combing through brush. Local residents opened their properties for searches. Officers entered sheds, garages, and crawl spaces with consent. Still no sign of Sebastian, no piece of clothing, and no dropped object like the missing flashlight. In most cases, the first 12 hours are crucial. This case defied that rule. It was as if the disappearance had occurred outside of time, no evidence to anchor a timeline to. Detectives from the TBI's Criminal Investigation Division began reviewing known risk factors. They learned Sebastian had autism and a rare genetic condition, 6q27 deletion syndrome, which could cause anxiety and impulsive behavior. According to behavioral analysts from the FBI, roughly half of children with autism who go missing are later found near water, drawn to reflections or sound. For that reason, every body of water within the grid was searched multiple times, by sonar and by divers. Each time, the result was the same: nothing. At this stage, investigators considered whether Sebastian could have been picked up by a vehicle. They reviewed traffic cameras, school cameras, and nearby residential surveillance systems. No vehicle was recorded stopping near the Proudfoot home between midnight and 6 a.m. Deputies also canvassed the area for witnesses. Several neighbors reported hearing nothing unusual. One resident thought they saw moving lights near the construction site at around 3 a.m., but that footage was later determined to show headlights from a distant road, a visual distortion caused by camera angle and trees. That theory was dismissed. The search continued through the week. By day 3, over 1,200 acres of dense woods had been cleared, 50 miles of road checked, and multiple retention ponds drained. Helicopters flew in rotations around the clock. They even brought in bloodhounds specifically trained for last scent isolation, capable of differentiating a subject's odor from family members. The result remained consistent: no scent trail, no direction of travel, no trace. For investigators, the search began to feel circular. Every path led back to the same starting point: the locked house. On February 28th, the command post logged 200 separate tips submitted by residents and social media users. None provided usable leads. Agents followed up on reported sightings in nearby counties, including one from a driver who thought they saw a teenager walking along Long Hollow Pike at dawn. Surveillance footage disproved that the person in the video was an adult jogger. By the end of the first week, searchers had spent more than 100 combined man-hours. Despite that effort, not a single confirmed item belonging to Sebastian had been recovered. No clothing fibers, no shoe prints, no personal effects. Even the missing flashlight hadn't surfaced. The absence of evidence began to create frustration inside the command post. The lead detective, Brandon Carter, described it in an interview as like chasing a question mark. Every resource was in play, yet the investigation had no shape. Technicians began testing the theory that scent could have dissipated due to wind currents or air pressure differences during the night. Weather data showed light wind from the west at 2 miles per hour, temperatures steady around 40 degrees Fahrenheit. Those conditions should have preserved, not erased, human scent. That left only two possibilities: either Sebastian never left the house under his own power, or he left by means that left no biological trace, such as being carried, shielded, or transported in a vehicle that prevented scent from dispersing. But again, the cameras and the locks didn't support that scenario. As the week closed, the official narrative was already splitting in two directions. One group of investigators leaned toward an accidental wandering and drowning scenario. The other suspected human involvement, an abduction or an event inside the home that had been missed. Both theories lacked evidence, yet both seemed possible, because everything else had been ruled out. By the seventh day, on March 3rd, the operation was scaled down from full emergency mode to a sustained investigation. The massive volunteer effort ended. Professional search units took over the continued sweep of the area. TBI, the sheriff's office, and the FBI consolidated resources to re-examine every piece of data gathered during that chaotic first week. The results from those 7 days were astonishing in their emptiness. No physical evidence, no forensic residue, no digital clue. A boy had disappeared, and the ground itself refused to remember it. From the first day of the investigation, detectives understood that this case would depend heavily on digital evidence. In modern missing person investigations, especially those inside populated neighborhoods, cameras and devices usually tell the story that witnesses cannot. But in the disappearance of Sebastian Rogers, the digital record turned out to be as silent as the house he vanished from. The Proudfoot residence had 2 exterior security cameras, one above the garage and another facing the backyard. Both were motion activated, set to record automatically whenever someone approached within a few feet. The system was functional, powered, and Wi-Fi connected. Investigators checked the logs. Between 9 p.m. on February 25th and 6 a.m. on February 26th, the cameras had triggered multiple times, but every clip matched normal household movement: Katie entering the kitchen, a neighborhood cat crossing the yard, headlights from a passing car at a distance. After midnight, the footage went still. No motion alerts, no files missing. Neighbors were asked to provide their own recordings. Over a dozen homes in Stafford Court and the adjoining cul-de-sac had doorbell or security cameras. Every available clip covering the relevant hours was collected, synchronized, and reviewed frame by frame. No person resembling Sebastian, no car, no unknown visitor appeared. Between 9 p.m. and dawn, not a single camera showed activity near the Proudfoot home. The data from Katie's dash cam, recorded earlier that evening, confirmed that mother and son returned home after dinner around 8:30 p.m. and did not leave again. Investigators verified the time stamps through GPS metadata. That evidence conclusively ruled out the possibility that they had gone somewhere later that night, or that Sebastian had been dropped off elsewhere. By the third day, detectives extended their digital search beyond the neighborhood. They pulled traffic camera feeds from Long Hollow Pike, New Shackle Island Road, and several intersections leading in and out of Stafford Court. They also checked school cameras from the route Katie drove the next morning while looking for her son. All clean. No relevant movement. No matching description. At this point, investigators requested full digital forensics on devices inside the house: phones, laptops, the Wi-Fi router, and the family's smart TV. Sebastian's personal phone, found on the kitchen table, had last been used on February 25th at 7:46 p.m. for a short YouTube session, followed by a quick text exchange with a friend about a video game. After that, no further activity. There were no messages indicating distress, planning, or intent to leave. The phone showed no GPS movement and no app usage past 8 p.m. The device was fully charged, suggesting it hadn't been used overnight. The home's Wi-Fi router logs told a similar story. The last connection from Sebastian's phone was at 8:03 p.m. The smart TV streamed content until 9:41 p.m., a show that Katie confirmed she had been watching before going to bed. After midnight, the network registered no new activity. None of the devices in the house, phone, TV, security cameras, Alexa speaker, detected movement, voice commands, or connection changes. It was as if the digital environment itself had gone dark during the same hours Sebastian disappeared. Investigators considered the possibility of a data wipe or deletion. If someone had entered the home and removed or manipulated footage, it would show in the log files. But nothing had been tampered with. The systems were intact, the memory cards undamaged, and timestamps sequential. No sign of hacking or power interruption was found. That led to the uncomfortable conclusion that there was simply nothing to record. The absence of digital evidence wasn't due to malfunction or concealment, It was because no detectable event occurred within the sensor range of any device. Investigators went back over every device again, searching for environmental cues, light fluctuations, sound triggers, or pixel disturbances that might suggest motion too subtle to register as a person. The analysis yielded minor reflections on one neighbor's camera lens between 2:57 and 3:10 a.m., faint glints that looked like distant moving lights. Initially, some believed these could be flashlights, possibly connected to the disappearance. But law enforcement later traced the source. It was not someone in the yard. The light came from vehicle headlights refracted through trees from a higher street, roughly 270 meters away. The video's angle and low light exposure had distorted the distance, creating the illusion of movement near Sebastian's home. Once plotted against daylight reference photos and topographic maps, the flashlight theory collapsed. That debunked footage would later fuel online speculation, but officially it was dismissed as no evidentiary value. Still, the mystery deepened. If there was no outside movement, could Sebastian have gone somewhere inside the digital blind spots, areas not covered by any camera's line of sight? Investigators re-examined the property layout. The back door opened toward a small patio leading to the yard, but that area was directly within the camera's range. The windows on the east side faced the neighbor's driveway, which had its own Ring camera. Even if he had left through a window, at least one camera would have captured his silhouette. None did. Digital analysts also cross-referenced cell tower triangulation around the neighborhood, looking for any unregistered device that might have connected briefly during the night. A signal from an unknown phone or car Wi-Fi system. The query returned normal results, no stray connections, no burner phones, no vehicle hotspots. That conclusion created a deeper contradiction. If Sebastian had simply wandered out, the cameras and devices should have recorded him. If someone had entered to take him, there should have been disruption, a motion trigger, a door sensor, a sudden power spike, or Wi-Fi reconnect. There was none. Some investigators began to question whether the event might have happened earlier than believed, perhaps before Katie's midnight call ended. But the timeline didn't fit. She had been awake and alert in the living room, phone in hand, and would have heard the door or the dog. Others speculated about accidental erasure or environmental interference, but the forensic review ruled those out. In the end, the digital record didn't just fail to provide answers, it erased possibilities. Every theory required at least one measurable event. The cameras said there were none. The network confirmed stillness. The environment itself had gone blank. The digital silence around that night became one of the central features of the Sebastian Rogers case, a gap in data where evidence should have existed. And it would soon connect to another element investigators couldn't ignore: the reports of strange moving lights seen at approximately 3 a.m., the same window of time when Sebastian was already missing. In the early hours of February 26th, while the rest of Hendersonville slept, one camera at the far end of Stafford Court captured something strange: two small points of light moving across the dark frame around 3:10 a.m. The footage, though grainy and distant, became the center of online speculation within days. Some viewers swore they saw two people walking with flashlights in the backyard of the Proudfoot residence. Others insisted it was evidence of an abduction: two intruders carrying lights, possibly taking the boy while his mother slept. The theory spread quickly across social media and community forums. To a public desperate for answers, those moving lights felt like the first real clue. Detectives took the footage seriously at first. The camera belonged to a neighbor at the end of the street, roughly 300 meters from the Proudfoot house. Investigators enhanced the video, stabilized the frame, and adjusted contrast to isolate the movement. The result was inconclusive: two small light sources flickering in near total darkness, crossing from left to right. Without context, it could have been anything: flashlights, reflections, vehicle headlights, even distant streetlights distorted by humidity. To verify, investigators performed a daytime reconstruction. They returned to the exact camera position and overlaid the video's perspective onto a topographic map. When they aligned the angles, the mystery began to dissolve. The path of the lights matched the elevation of a hill roughly 270 meters away, where a side street curved upward. At the same time, the camera recorded the lights. Another surveillance feed from that hill captured a vehicle traveling east, with its headlights flashing intermittently through the trees. Law enforcement officially debunked the theory within a few days. The two people with flashlights were nothing more than optical distortion. Investigators even released side-by-side images showing how the beams corresponded to the distant road. Once that analysis went public, the flashlight theory collapsed. But the damage had already been done. The rumor spread faster than the correction, creating a flood of false leads that wasted time and resources. While the light footage was being examined, another lead took shape, one that would dominate the early search efforts: the ponds. Hendersonville has several small retention ponds and drainage basins built around its suburban developments. One of them sits just a few hundred yards from the Proudfoot home, bordered by tall reeds and unfinished construction. Because Sebastian was on the autism spectrum, investigators immediately flagged these water features as high-risk locations. Data from the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit showed that nearly 3/4 of accidental deaths among missing children with autism occur in or near water. The reasoning is simple: reflective surfaces, rippling light, and the soothing sound of water often attract sensory-seeking children. For search coordinators, that made the retention pond the first logical focus. By the second day of the search, teams from the Sumner County Sheriff's Office, the Tennessee Emergency Management Agency, and volunteer groups like the United Cajun Navy brought in sonar, small boats, and pumps. They drained the pond systematically, checking the silt at the bottom for footprints, fibers, or any objects matching the missing flashlight. Divers scanned culverts and drainage pipes connected to the pond. Nothing surfaced. A second pond, roughly half a mile away, was drained as well. Again, negative results. Still, a rumor persisted that the KD9 teams had picked up a scent trail leading toward the first pond. The origin of that claim was unclear, possibly from leaked radio chatter between handlers. Officially, neither the sheriff's office nor the TBI ever confirmed it. Some officers privately acknowledged that one dog appeared to alert briefly near the edge of the water, but later testing and reruns failed to replicate the result. Environmental factors, wind direction, water vapor, and decaying organic material can produce false positives for scent dogs, especially around stagnant water. For the forensic teams on the ground, the results were definitive. Both ponds had been drained, dredged, and tested for biological traces. None were found. No hair, no clothing, no fingerprints, no trace DNA. The sonar crews used side scan imaging to visualize the pond floors. The only debris recovered were soda cans, branches, and a few small rocks. Even the missing yellow flashlight wasn't there. That detail, the one object Sebastian was thought to have taken with him, remained unaccounted for. After exhausting the water searches, investigators turned their attention to the construction site adjacent to the pond. It was an open area of gravel and half-built homes. Workers confirmed that no one had been present overnight. Security cameras from the site showed no human movement during the critical hours. But these early dead ends did something important for the investigation. They ruled out the two most statistically common scenarios: accidental wandering into water and abduction caught on camera. That meant the disappearance didn't fit the typical patterns used by federal analysts. To the detectives still working the case, the focus shifted from what could be seen to what couldn't. If the cameras had mislulled them with the illusion of light, and the ponds had yielded nothing despite sonar proof, maybe the clue they needed wasn't visual at all. For now, the official statement from the sheriff's office was clear. All nearby water sources have been searched and cleared. The video of the lights has no evidentiary value. Behind closed doors, though, investigators knew that each eliminated lead left the same haunting conclusion. The world had been watching that night: cameras, neighbors, sensors, even the reflection of headlights, and yet none of it captured a single trace of a boy who vanished inside that window between midnight and dawn. The water became the primary focus of the search effort, not because of any direct evidence, but because of statistics. The FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit, brought in to consult on the case, provided data that painted a sobering picture. Nearly half of all children with autism who go missing are later found within a short distance of their home, often near water. And among those fatal outcomes, 71% involve drowning. Those numbers shape the next phase of the investigation. If Sebastian had wandered, the most logical danger zone was the network of ponds, creeks, and drainage systems surrounding Stafford Court. Within 48 hours, maps were drawn, satellite images analyzed, and every water source within a 5-mile radius was plotted. There were 7 major bodies of water identified, 2 retention ponds in the immediate subdivision, a creek running parallel to Drake's Creek Road, a small man-made reservoir near the golf course, and several storm drains and culverts leading toward Old Shackle Island. Teams began working systematically through each one. The United Cajun Navy and EquiSearch, 2 volunteer organizations specializing in water recovery, were brought in to assist local authorities. They arrived with boats equipped with side-scan sonar, thermal cameras, and divers trained for low-visibility recovery. The sonar sweeps were run day and night, the monitors scanning the murky depths for anything with the size or density of a human body. Nothing appeared. When sonar imagery failed to reveal anomalies, divers entered the ponds manually. They searched sediment layers, overturned debris, and followed drainage channels. In the first week alone, over 20 separate water locations were cleared. No remains, no clothing, no objects matching the missing yellow flashlight. Water samples were taken from every site to test for trace DNA or organic residue. The forensic labs returned the same answer across the board: negative. There were no blood markers, no fibers, no biological matter consistent with Sebastian. The findings ruled out drowning, at least within the immediate area. Detectives expanded the radius further. Small creeks, irrigation ditches, and storm drains were inspected up to 5 miles from the Proudfoot home. Searchers even lowered cameras into culverts that were too narrow for divers. The water systems in that part of Hendersonville were interconnected, but none showed signs of disturbance. To understand how thorough the search was, it helps to know how sonar imaging works. The side scan units create acoustic reflections that can detect human-sized shapes, even when visibility is 0. Each pond was mapped multiple times at different angles. If a body had been there, it would have appeared as a high-density shadow. There were none. This exhaustive process led to a strange conclusion. Statistically, Sebastian should have been found if he had entered water. Yet the water yielded nothing at all. Not a footprint in the silt, not a hair strand caught on vegetation, not a floating item of clothing. Even accidental drownings produce debris, shoes, a shirt, an object carried by current. In this case, the water offered no trace. Investigators began to reconsider their assumptions. If Sebastian had not drowned, then the search radius, and perhaps the premise itself, was wrong. But abandoning the water hypothesis was difficult, because it fit both his behavioral profile and the geography. BU specialists emphasized that autistic children with sensory triggers are often drawn to reflections or rhythmic sounds, particularly in quiet nighttime environments. The retention ponds were only minutes from his home. Yet even if he had gone toward them, the evidence suggested he never arrived. This paradox began to fracture the investigative team into 2 schools of thought. The first held that Sebastian had indeed approached a body of water, but that environmental conditions had erased the trace, perhaps strong drainage flow, perhaps wildlife interference. The second believed he never reached the ponds at all, meaning the event's origin lay elsewhere, inside the home, or beyond the neighborhood entirely. To test the first theory, specialists re-examined water movement data from the night of February 25th. Rainfall had been minimal, and retention systems were functioning normally. No sudden influx or overflow that could have carried an object away. The water levels were stable, meaning if something had entered, it should have remained within range of sonar detection. The drainage analysis ruled out one more thing: there was no outlet large enough to allow a human body to pass undetected. That fact eliminated the possibility of Sebastian being swept away by runoff. Meanwhile, volunteer divers extended their work into larger, deeper bodies of water, Old Hickory Lake and Drake's Creek. Boats scanned the shoreline, docks, and boat slips. Again, the sonar grids were clear. Not a single anomaly resembling a person or large object was logged. At a briefing held on March 1st, the TBI's lead investigator addressed the press. Every known body of water within the search radius has been examined by trained personnel using sonar, divers, and thermal equipment. No evidence has been recovered. At this time, we are not ruling out any possibilities. Privately, however, detectives were already thinking about how narrow the water theory had become. They couldn't find Sebastian on land or in water. The only remaining direction was movement, not by foot, but by vehicle. That line of thought led to the next operational phase, tracing garbage routes, delivery trucks, maintenance vehicles, and construction traffic from the night of February 25th into the morning of the 26th. The logic was simple. If a person or object had been moved away from Stafford Court without leaving footprints, then mechanical transport was the only mechanism left. Someone could have carried him or driven him away before the first light of dawn. After 2 weeks, the aquatic hypothesis was officially downgraded. The ponds, creeks, and drainage systems had been cleared. The data showed no drowning, no accidental fall, no evidence of contact with water. For a case that began with statistical logic, it was an illogical end. The conclusion was simple but devastating. If the water held nothing, then Sebastian had never reached it. And if he hadn't, something, or someone, must have taken him another way. By early March 2024, nearly 2 weeks had passed since Sebastian Rogers vanished from his home in Hendersonville. The air searches, ground grids, and water scans had yielded nothing. At this stage, investigators faced an uncomfortable truth. The case had no physical direction left. Every standard search area, land, air, and water had been cleared. What remained was the one domain no investigator ever wants to consider, the landfill. Between March 6th and 8th, 2024, a multi-agency task force expanded the search to the White Plains landfill in Hopkins County, Kentucky, about 90 miles north of Hendersonville. That facility is one of the designated destinations for municipal waste collected from Sumner County. Every week, hundreds of tons of trash from residential and commercial pickup routes are compacted, sealed, and transported there. If anything connected to Sebastian's disappearance had been discarded, intentionally or accidentally, this was the only place it could end up. Publicly, officials described the operation as a precautionary measure. There was no confirmed evidence suggesting a body or object was taken there. But privately, investigators understood the logic. The landfill is where evidence goes to die, and timing was critical. Waste from the week of February 26th would only remain near the surface for a limited period before being buried under new layers. Once that happened, the chance of recovery dropped to nearly zero. At dawn on March 6th, the Sumner County Sheriff's Office, working with TBI and FBI evidence teams, began coordinating with the landfill's Environmental Management Division. They identified specific truck routes and collection zones that handled trash from the neighborhoods around Stafford Court. Every truck in that cycle was cross-referenced through GPS logs and weigh station entries. By narrowing the disposal window to the days immediately after Sebastian disappeared, they isolated a roughly 2-acre sector within the landfill, the area where those trucks had unloaded. Excavation began under controlled forensic conditions. Crews in protective gear moved through the compacted layers using excavators and hand tools, carefully separating waste into manageable grids. Every few feet, the material was raked and scanned for potential biological evidence, clothing fibers, or personal effects. Forensic technicians on site carried DNA swabs, luminol spray, and portable lighting to identify organic matter. The process was slow and exhausting. Over 3 days, hundreds of cubic yards of debris were examined. The odor, the chemical exposure, and the weight of the task made it one of the most difficult operations in the investigation. Yet by the third evening, the result was the same as every search before it: nothing connected to Sebastian. No fabric fragments, no footwear, no electronic device, no flashlight. At a press conference following the operation, a TBI spokesperson stated simply, "The search of the landfill was conducted out of an abundance of caution." No evidence related to the disappearance of Sebastian Rogers was located. But the decision to search there raised important questions, especially among local residents who followed the case closely. Why move to a landfill in another state when no sign of foul play had been established? What prompted investigators to believe something could have been transported there in the first place? Inside the command post, the reasoning was pragmatic. When all above ground and natural areas produce zero leads, investigators turn to the waste stream as a final measure. Trash collection is one of the few systems that physically removes material from a community, often within hours. If an object had been discarded, intentionally or accidentally, it could have left the jurisdiction before anyone realized it was significant. Another factor influenced the decision: the early morning sanitation pickup schedule for Hendersonville's residential zones. Records showed that a waste truck serviced parts of the Stafford Court subdivision on February 26th, the same morning Katie discovered her son missing. That timing led to speculation, unconfirmed but logical, that if any physical evidence had been removed from the property, it might have gone out with that collection. Investigators made it clear there was no evidence to suggest that scenario actually happened. But given the stakes, they couldn't afford to ignore even the faintest possibility. The landfill search was about eliminating the last unexamined path, not pursuing a specific suspect. From a forensic standpoint, landfill investigations are notoriously limited. Even when a target is known, a specific bag, a particular item decomposition, chemical exposure, and compaction make recovery extremely difficult. After 10 to 12 days, most organic traces degrade beyond usable DNA. In this case, nearly 10 days had already passed before the first excavation. That alone drastically reduced the odds of finding anything identifiable. By the evening of March 8th, the operation was called off. The sector was cleared and recovered according to environmental regulations. Equipment was sanitized, and samples were sent for lab testing. Within days, results confirmed what the field teams already knew. No trace of Sebastian Rogers existed in the landfill. The official narrative, released jointly by the Sumner County Sheriff's Office, TBI, and FBI, framed the Kentucky dig as part of a broader, methodical search pattern. But unofficially, it marked a turning point in the investigation. The failure to find even trace evidence in such an extreme location reinforced a theory that had been quietly forming among the senior detectives. If Sebastian wasn't on land, in water, or among the waste stream, then he had likely left the area by controlled means. That meant transportation, possibly a vehicle. What made that possibility so troubling was that there was still no record of any vehicle near the Proudfoot home during the disappearance window. No headlights, no license plates, no engine sounds reported by neighbors. The Kentucky search closed one door while opening another. Someone, somewhere, might have moved the boy before sunrise on February 26th, quietly, efficiently, and without leaving a trace. That scenario shifted the focus of the investigation from environmental to human. It was no longer about where Sebastian could have gone. It was about who had access to him, and whether anyone close to the family had opportunity, motive, or reason to conceal the truth. As the physical search stalled, attention shifted toward the family itself, not out of accusation, but necessity. When a case produces no environmental or digital evidence, investigators inevitably turn inward. They begin to examine background, relationships, and the psychological climate of the household. In the disappearance of Sebastian Rogers, that process opened a complicated set of personal histories and official records. The first document to resurface was the 2016 divorce decree between Sebastian's parents, Katie Rogers, later Proudfoot, and Seth Rogers. It described a young child already facing severe behavioral and developmental challenges. Court records noted that Sebastian had been diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder and a rare chromosomal anomaly known as 6q27 deletion syndrome, a condition often associated with delayed speech, impulsivity, and difficulty processing emotional regulation. At that time, both parents agreed that his care would require structure and supervision. The records also referenced instances of self-harm during emotional outbursts. In one documented incident, when he was denied a favorite activity, Sebastian reportedly hit his head against the wall and bit his own arm. The files made no allegations, but they painted a portrait of a child who struggled with sensory control, one who could be unpredictable under stress. As the years went on, those behavioral patterns appeared to intensify. According to statements later given by his father, Sebastian had developed a clear preference for one household. He told me he didn't want to go back to his mom's. Seth said in an interview after the disappearance. I don't know why. He just said he felt better here. That comment, vague but loaded, became a focal point for investigators trying to understand what life was like for Sebastian in the days before he vanished. Did he feel unsafe? Or was it a simple expression of a teenager's mood swing? Then came the CPS rumor, an unverified claim circulating online that the Tennessee Child Protective Services had once investigated Katie's home after an alleged bell incident. The story suggested that a disciplinary method involving a small bell or chime had prompted a welfare check years earlier. To date, no official record of that case has been released, and the agency has declined to comment. But the rumor persisted, fueling public suspicion. For investigators, however, speculation wasn't evidence. They sought documentation. CPS, bound by confidentiality laws, provided only a limited statement confirming that past reports involving the family were reviewed and closed without findings anything. The wording left open interpretation, reviewed, not necessarily unfounded, but closed. It neither exonerated nor implicated anyone. Despite the lack of confirmation, these fragments of history began to shape the investigative tone. They raised an uncomfortable but unavoidable question. Was Sebastian's disappearance the result of external circumstances, or had something occurred within the family home that night? In interviews with detectives, Katie described her son as sensitive, creative, and affectionate. Though prone to emotional shutdowns when overstimulated, she maintained that their relationship had been improving, that they'd spent the day before his disappearance laughing and relaxed. She also emphasized that her husband, Chris Proudfoot, had been away on business, hours from home, and could not have been present. Investigators verified Chris's location through phone GPS and transaction logs. His alibi held. Still, scrutiny extended to everyone in the inner circle. The emotional landscape of the family had become too fragmented to ignore. A week after the disappearance, while Seth continued daily search efforts alongside volunteers, Katie and Chris quietly left Hendersonville. They packed belongings into an RV and drove away, citing safety concerns. After receiving threats online, many saw the move as suspicious. Law enforcement did not label them suspects, but the optics were damaging. To the public, it looked like retreat. To detectives, it complicated communication. They now had to coordinate long-distance interviews with the child's mother, while the father remained on the ground, speaking to reporters and search teams. Seth's presence at search sites was constant. Local media often captured him walking wooded areas with a flashlight, distributing flyers, and pleading for information. "I'm not leaving until I bring my son home," he told reporters. The contrast between his persistence and Katie's withdrawal fed narratives that would soon dominate online spaces: divided family, hidden tension, conflicting loyalties. Within law enforcement circles, the departure of the mother wasn't treated as guilt, but as an obstacle. Investigators prefer unified families, centralized communication, shared updates, synchronized timelines. In this case, coordination fractured. Statements began to diverge. Katie's recollection of the last night was consistent with her initial report, but some minor details shifted: how loud the thud was, how long she waited before going to bed, whether a hallway light had been on. Detectives noted those inconsistencies in their logs, but acknowledged they might be the result of trauma and memory decay, not deceit. Another challenge lay in the nature of autism-related disappearances. Children and teens on the spectrum often act independently of emotion. They might leave a safe space simply to follow a sensory trigger, a sound, a light, a texture, and that behavior can look inexplicable to neurotypical observers. By the third week, the emotional distance between the two parental households was unmistakable. Seth continued coordinating search efforts publicly. Katie and Chris limited communication to their legal representatives and investigators. The family's division became both a public narrative and an investigative complication. For detectives, the family's history and the CPS context didn't prove foul play, but they did establish emotional motive possibilities: stress, exhaustion, conflict, misunderstanding. Cases involving special needs children often carry heavy caregiver strain. If an accident occurred, Fear of blame could drive concealment. If a runaway event occurred, guilt could drive avoidance. Both reactions create silence, and silence was all this case had. By late March, investigators had little more than psychological data, a family split by geography and public perception, a child with a known vulnerability, and a household history shadowed by unverified reports. None of it answered what happened, but together it defined the human context of the mystery, a fractured environment where truth might not be shared, and cooperation no longer guaranteed. As one detective privately summarized, "Everyone says they want to find Sebastian. I believe that. But they're not all pulling in the same direction anymore." And with that division, the investigation entered its next and most confounding stage, not about family behavior or statistics, but about something larger. By April 2024, the case of Sebastian Rogers had entered a phase rarely seen in modern investigations, one defined entirely by absence. No video, no footprint, no object, no digital signal. A boy had vanished in a populated neighborhood lined with cameras, sensors, Wi-Fi routers, and motion lights, yet not one device had recorded his exit. In an age where every movement leaves a trace, this disappearance left none. For investigators, it became known internally as the no-trace paradox, a case that existed without evidence. Every discipline, forensic, digital, behavioral, had been exhausted, and yet the official classification remained active missing person. The file stayed open, but it was empty of progress. By the end of the third month, volunteer groups were still combing through woods and creeks miles beyond Stafford Court. Local organizations like Find Sebastian Rogers, along with national search teams such as EQ-Search and United Cajun Navy, continued their own sweeps long after official operations had scaled back. Hundreds of hours logged, dozens of new zones mapped, every single effort ending in zero results. Detectives began meeting weekly with analysts from the FBI, the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation, and the Sumner County Sheriff's Office. The updates rarely changed. All physical leads had been tested and closed. The FBI's technical division re-examined cell tower data across a 30-mile radius, looking for any blip from Sebastian's phone or any unknown device connecting near his home that night. There were none. The TBI's forensic unit cross-checked doorbell camera timestamps from more than 60 households, covering every possible angle on Stafford Court and its connecting streets. Again, nothing. Investigators faced the truth that, under normal circumstances, a human disappearance without measurable residue is nearly impossible. Even in planned abductions, perpetrators leave behind data, a license plate on camera, a phone ping, a trace DNA strand. Sebastian's case had none of those things. At that point, two dominant theories began to crystallize. The first, the scene was altered after the disappearance. That would mean someone with access, possibly within the family or close circle, had manipulated or removed evidence before police arrived. This could explain the missing footprints, the absence of scent for K9 units, and the perfect stillness of the camera feeds. The second theory, Sebastian left the area before any device was triggered, an incredibly narrow window of time, suggesting movement between 10 p.m. and midnight, before Katie's phone call ended, or before neighbors' cameras rammed for the night. Both explanations carried their own contradictions. If the scene had been altered, it implied deliberate concealment, a cover-up involving knowledge, motive, and opportunity. Yet no one in the household exhibited signs of injury, panic, or guilt in the early interviews. If, on the other hand, Sebastian had left unassisted, it demanded a level of coordination inconsistent with his behavioral profile and condition. Either possibility strained logic. Behind the scenes, the no-trace paradox began to influence how investigators spoke about the case. Standard terminology, missing juvenile, endangered child, runaway risk, no longer fit. They were dealing with something else entirely, a disappearance that seemed to defy the measurable framework of investigation. For months, the community held on to hope. Posters stayed up on store windows. Social media groups kept circulating Sebastian's image. Volunteers organized candlelight vigils and prayer walks through the neighborhoods. Yet the investigation itself reached a plateau. Leads dried up, witness tips repeated earlier claims already dismissed. Law enforcement issued occasional updates reaffirming that the case was active and ongoing. But privately, the momentum had slowed. Some agents began revisiting the timeline not to find what was missing, but to test when the data stopped recording reality. In other words, when did the physical world lose its last measurable contact with Sebastian Rogers? Was it the moment of the loud thud around 10 p.m.? Was it sometime between his mother's phone call and her going to bed? Or was it the 6-hour void between midnight and dawn, when the house was silent and locked? Every answer pointed back to the same void, a 6-hour gap unaccounted for, yet untouched by any trace of human action. By June 2024, the case had drawn the attention of national analysts, forensic psychologists, and missing person experts. Each reviewed the evidence independently, each reached the same impasse. The physical record refused to expand. The no-trace paradox was not a metaphor, it was the literal condition of the case. In forensic terms, the Rogers disappearance stood as an anomaly, a situation where every known investigative method produced zero measurable output. And in the absence of trace, only theory remained. From that point forward, the investigation would divide along 3 paths, each built from the same silence, but each offering a different interpretation of what that silence meant. By the 4th month of the investigation, the official task force reduced the active field operations and shifted toward analytical review, a process built on what investigators called the 3 working theories. Each attempted to explain how a 14-year-old boy could vanish from a locked house without evidence, witnesses, or digital trace. None were fully convincing, but together they formed the framework for everything that came next. Voluntary departure, the wandering hypothesis. This was the earliest and simplest theory, that Sebastian, as a child with autism spectrum disorder, had wandered off voluntarily. Statistically, half of missing children on the spectrum do so at least once in their lives. Many are drawn to light, sound, or movement, sensory cues that can override fear or logic. It was a theory grounded in data, not drama. Behavioral analysts from the FBI's BU supported this scenario in the early days. They noted that children with ASD can become fixated on small tasks, even at night, chasing a reflection, retrieving an object, following a pattern of thought that seems trivial to others. It's possible, they argued, that Sebastian woke up, picked up his flashlight, and stepped outside to investigate something. But the facts quickly eroded the logic. The night air was around 40 degrees F. He was barefoot. His shoes were still beside the bed, his phone on the table, his jacket in the closet. For a child with sensory sensitivity, cold ground and sharp textures are deeply uncomfortable. It was inconsistent with his known behaviors. The other flaw was geography. Even if he had wandered out, search teams covered every direction within a 5-mile radius: land, water, drainage, wooded terrain. 2,000 people searched. Yet not a footprint or thread of fabric was found. There were no sightings on any camera, public or private. The wandering theory explained why he might have left, but not how he could have disappeared without trace. For that reason, investigators gradually downgraded it. Still, it couldn't be dismissed entirely. It remained the least accusatory and most psychologically plausible. If Sebastian had indeed stepped out into the dark, he had done so for reasons known only to him, and vanished before any system detected his movement. Accidental or medical event, the concealment hypothesis. The second theory developed quietly inside the command post, one that detectives discussed more than they admitted publicly. It suggested that an accident might have occurred inside the home before midnight, and that its aftermath was concealed, intentionally or not. The idea stemmed from one detail: the loud thud Katie heard before 10 p.m., followed by Sebastian's voice saying, "I'm fine." If that sound had been more than an ordinary noise, a fall, a seizure, or a head injury, then the disappearance could have started hours earlier than believed. A medical emergency might have turned fatal, and in panic or fear of consequences, someone could have hidden the evidence. Supporters of this theory within the investigative team pointed to the complete lack of external indicators: no forced entry, no scent trail, no trace outside. Everything pointed inward. The home was the last confirmed location. Logic demanded the explanation start there. However, this hypothesis carried a major flaw: no physical residue supported it. Forensic sweeps of the house, walls, flooring, plumbing, and drains turned up nothing. No blood, no disturbed surfaces, no altered fixtures. Luminol tests were negative. Even the family's vehicles showed no signs of recent cleaning or biological transfer. Investigators also had to weigh human factors. If concealment had occurred, it would have required composure, coordination, and access to disposal means within hours, while police and neighbors were already mobilizing. Such actions seemed improbable without detection. Nonetheless, the accidental event scenario remained on the table because it answered a key question: why the cameras and sensors recorded nothing? If the event happened before the house entered its quiet midnight period, then the digital void afterward would make sense. Not because nothing happened, but because everything had already happened. It was an unsettling theory, one that investigators could neither prove nor dismiss, and it lingered as a private possibility in their internal discussions. Abduction or assisted departure, the vehicle theory. The third theory, and the one that never fully closed, was that someone took Sebastian, either by coercion, manipulation, or direct transport. The case had already ruled out forced entry and stranger intrusion, but that didn't eliminate the possibility of a known individual. The strongest argument for this came not from evidence, but from what was missing. If a person had access to the home and to Sebastian's trust, they wouldn't need to break in. They could persuade him to open the door quietly, perhaps even willingly. The rumor that circulated online about a man in a green hoodie speaking to Katie at a restaurant the night before briefly fueled this angle. The man was located and cleared, but the idea persisted: could someone familiar, perhaps from the family's social circle, have used that trust to approach Sebastian later that night? The FBI considered the vehicle hypothesis plausible, especially after eliminating all local ground and water scenarios. If Sebastian had been picked up by car and driven out of the area before sunrise, it would explain the absence of footprints, scent, and camera data. A car interior traps scent, preventing dogs from tracking. However, it required precise timing, an approach and departure during a 6-hour window with no visible headlights and no recorded audio disturbances. The neighborhood layout made that nearly impossible. Stafford Court was a small cul-de-sac with only one entry and exit. Any car movement after midnight should have triggered at least one nearby camera. None did. That paradox, the possibility of an abduction that left no digital signature, kept this theory open but unprovable. It remained the only one that could reconcile the total absence of evidence with a human mechanism of disappearance. By the end of April, these three scenarios were all that remained. Each had elements of logic and contradiction. Each answered one question while creating another. Detectives began categorizing them not as competing explanations, but as layers of the same enigma. Perhaps parts of each were true: a voluntary step outside, an unforeseen event, and a third party's intervention. In the internal language of the case file, the notation beside the working summary was simple: cause of disappearance undetermined, no trace, no witness, no closure. As of 2025, more than a year after his disappearance, Sebastian Wayne Drake Rogers remains missing. The official classification has not changed: active missing person. The investigation is still open, shared between the Sumner County Sheriff's Office, the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation, and the Federal Bureau of Investigation. The federal reward of $5,000 is still active for any verified information that could lead to locating Sebastian or determining what happened between midnight and dawn on February 26, 2024. The case file by now spans thousands of pages: search logs, forensic results, psychological evaluations, witness statements, technical audits, and hundreds of public tips. Yet its conclusion remains the same as it did on day one: no trace, no confirmed sightings, no physical evidence. For investigators, this is no longer just a missing child case, it has become a long-term forensic anomaly. Over time, the official search operations have transitioned into maintenance mode. The helicopters, K9 units, and drones are no longer deployed daily, but the digital search continues. Analysts still review new data, hoping a single overlooked frame or sensor ping might connect to the timeline. Cold case specialists from the FBI's Violent Crime Section periodically re-examine the file with fresh algorithms, comparing satellite imagery, new AI-enhanced video scans, and pattern recognition software that didn't exist in 2024. None have found a lead. Meanwhile, the public effort has never fully stopped. The community group finds Sebastian Rogers remains active on social media, sharing updated posters and organizing periodic awareness events. Residents in Hendersonville still display flyers in store windows. Online, the case continues to circulate among true crime forums, Reddit threads, and investigative podcasts. Law enforcement's strategy has evolved into targeted reevaluation rather than wide-scale search. 5 investigative directions are being reactivated for 2025, re-examining all private camera footage and neighborhood vehicle activity from the night of February 25th into the morning of the 26th. This includes not only doorbell and driveway cameras, but also traffic and delivery vehicle footage that might have been archived or overlooked. New AI software will attempt to identify subtle reflections, light changes, shadow movements, invisible to the naked eye. Reprocessing the home network logs, the household router and connected IoT devices, thermostats, lights, smart plugs, are being reanalyzed to detect micro-fluctuations in data transmission. Even a momentary signal disruption could indicate motion, power fluctuation, or interference. These small traces might clarify whether the no activity pattern truly meant stillness or a temporary disconnect. Investigating the thud at 10 p.m., the original sound that Katie described has been under renewed forensic review. Experts are studying whether the noise profile, based on her phone's open call with her husband, could be reconstructed. Digital forensics can extract ambient noise from call metadata, and if successful, that audio could reveal whether the sound came from an object falling, a door closing, or something more significant. Re-expanding the aquatic search radius. While initial searches covered 5 miles, investigators now plan to extend to 8 to 10 miles, including lesser-known private ponds and uncharted retention systems created during new housing development. Changes in water levels and vegetation since 2024 could expose items previously hidden from sonar detection. Revisiting the transportation theory, analysts are examining garbage collection, construction, and delivery truck routes from the early hours of February 26th. Each vehicle's GPS log will be rechecked for anomalies, brief unscheduled stops, detours, or time discrepancies. The working hypothesis is that if Sebastian was moved, voluntarily or otherwise, it would have been through some form of mechanical transport within that narrow 6-hour window. In internal memos, the case is now categorized under extended active review. That means every 6 months, a new team of analysts is assigned to reprocess existing data using updated technology. While this approach rarely leads to breakthroughs, it ensures the case is never archived as cold. Emotionally, the community remains divided between hope and resignation. Vigils held each February mark another year without answers. Some cling to the possibility that Sebastian is alive somewhere, living under a different name, far from the reach of search grids. Others accept the darker likelihood that whatever happened occurred quietly, within those locked walls, and was hidden too well to recover. For law enforcement, professionalism demands neutrality. The official statement from the Sumner County Sheriff's Office reads the same every few months. This case remains active. Every lead will be pursued until resolution. The search for Sebastian Rogers continues. But within investigative circles, the silence of this case has become almost symbolic, a study in how modern detection systems can still fail when confronted with a perfectly contained disappearance. In a world where nearly every second of life is recorded, one missing child still defies the record itself. The files remain open. The reward remains posted. The questions remain unanswered. The case of Sebastian Rogers is not closed, one investigator said quietly. It's just waiting for something in the data to finally speak. Until that moment comes, the case stands as it began, a single fact surrounded by an ocean of nothing. A boy vanished. Everything else stayed exactly where it was,